Today, a special WrestleMania OTR, Eric Bischoff one-on-one. We had to postpone it for a day. Here's what he said. Landsberg chickened out. This is in the Calgary Sun. I've done this show before, and I know Landsberg is just a gutless coward. Think there'll be some heat? We'll ask him about what went wrong in the WCW, Hulk Hogan, and Vince McMahon. I'm almost afraid to say these words, but what the heck? Bring it on.
Off the Record with Michael Landsberg is brought to you by the Keg Steakhouse and Bar. For great steaks, good friends, see you tonight.
Today we sit down with a guy that we absolutely had to book because he owes me money. Ha! $5, in fact. That was once the sum that we wagered over the outcome of the ratings battle that you had with Vince McMahon on Monday night.
Was that $5 American or was that $5 Canadian?
Well, back then it was probably on par, but right now there is some advantage to taking American money. Now, this was unscripted, and it's a win no matter what happens on the rest of the show. Actually, we wanted to book this man because he is a great talker and is, no matter how you slice it, one of the key figures in everything that we call pro wrestling today. Eric Bischoff, nice to see you.
Great to be here. Thanks, Michael.
Now, on this show, when we interview wrestlers one-on-one like this, we have made our mark because you go out of character, because we talk about issues that no one else talks about. You don't like that, do you? You'd like to have your wrestlers still in character.
Yeah, I think that there's something unique about our form of entertainment, and one of the things that makes it unique is the illusion and the mystique. And personally, I feel that when characters go out and reveal too much and let everybody behind the curtain, so to speak, that you lose some of that mystique, and I think it's a mistake.
You ever share that view with Vince? Because Vince clearly evolved 180 degrees away from that. At one time, that was the philosophy of the company. And then, coincidentally, when we started this show in 1997, Vince started to see the value in allowing his people to talk about how they felt and not how the company wanted them to feel.
To answer your first question, no, I've never had that conversation with Vince. It's never come up in any of our conversations. And I'm not suggesting that wrestlers don't come out of character. What I'm suggesting is that the depth of detail that they sometimes go into is not necessarily always helpful to the overall picture.
You clearly still think like an owner. You ran the WCW. Vince was your greatest competitor. Vince was a guy that you didn't hesitate for a second to slag and say, we're at war with him. What's it like working for him now?
I enjoy it. Vince is a very focused, very intense personality that demands a lot of himself and all the people around him. To a certain degree, he's a perfectionist. That's been my experience with him. But I like that environment.
Is it difficult for you, though, knowing that at one time you guys were on the same level and now you work for him? You don't work behind the scenes. You are a performer. And I think anyone who watches you perform would say you're a great performer. But right now, you're one of the guys that used to work with you, and you're not on an even level with Vince.
It doesn't bother me, and I don't really look at it that way. I looked at this as an opportunity. I'm still doing a lot of other things. I've got other projects that I'm managing. I've got other goals that I'm achieving outside of my relationship with Vince. So in terms of the way I look at myself, I'm very comfortable with the role that
Do you want to go back behind the scenes? Would you like to book the show? Would you like to write for the show? Would you like to do more of the things that you used to do, even away from the business of running it, which I know that you were hugely burdened by, but the actual scripting of the show?
Not really. People don't realize just how difficult of a job that really is. It's a full-time job. It's one thing to sit at home and get on the internet and throw a few ideas around, what you would do if you were Vince McMahon or if you were Eric Bischoff when I was running WCW. But the truth of the matter is that is a full-time and a half job, and you have to be dedicated to it 24/7. And I've lived through that part of my life, and I enjoyed it. I have the best of both worlds right now. If I have an idea that I'm passionate about, that I think will work, I can knock on just about anybody's door I want to knock on, sit down and have that conversation.
So are you then happy, because from how I understand it, you actually made a bid on WCW. You took a shot at purchasing the company when you were out before Vince eventually purchased it. Are you happy that you didn't get it now? Because what you're saying essentially is that you love where you are right now.
No, I'm not happy that didn't happen, because that would have been a whole different situation. I would have been in an equity position at that time, and I really wanted to acquire WCW, which is why we made the attempt in the first place. But I moved on. That was a couple of years ago, and once that deal fell through, once it became apparent that we weren't going to be able to acquire that property from Time Warner, I closed the book on that part of my life and moved on.
See, one of the things that I see with wrestlers, because it seems like almost everybody leaves for a time, either they left the Federation or they left WCW, and many guys are out of it for a time, but they are drawn back because it's in their blood. If Vince McMahon ever left for a time, if WWE went under, you know he would be back because he's a wrestling guy. But I don't see you as being a wrestling guy. What brought you back?
But I think I am a wrestling guy at heart. You know, there's a passion for what I do. I love being in front of that crowd and getting them to react. That's a very empowering position to be in. It's satisfying. It's ego. It's all of the things that drive any performer. And I think you could say the same thing about musicians. It's probably the same reason why rock stars never really retire. It's the same reason why Kiss has been on a farewell tour for the last 4 years, because they never want to say goodbye. It's too addicting. So
part of it is the ego, and people use that as in a negative way, but it doesn't have to be negative. Ego is what allows us to get out of bed and carry our head up high. Some say that it can be out of control. When I met you 5 years ago, I thought that you were a guy who was driven to some extent by his ego. Was that a fair comment?
Sure, still is. I am driven by my ego, and I'm proud to say it. I'm grateful for the fact that I'm driven by my ego. My ego demands that I provide a very good lifestyle for my family. My ego demands of me that I provide unique opportunities for my children. My ego demands that I live in a certain lifestyle. So absolutely I'm driven by my ego.
So given the fact that you are concerned by how people see you, you enjoy people watching you, how much does it bother you that people look at you and know that WCW failed and that you were one of the guys that was running it at that time? How much does that haunt you?
No, you're wrong. I was not one of the guys that was running it at that time.
But when the WCW was on its way down, you were dismissed from your position, right?
Two different things.
Okay.
I take a position that the reason WCW failed is because I left the company in 1999. Here are the facts that you haven't heard, because there's been a number of wrestlers that would come out and people associated with WCW would come out and position my departure in a number of different ways. None of them had any idea what was really going on. None of them were involved in the decision or the meetings or the situation leading up to it. The fact of the matter is, I knew WCW was in a bad position as early as mid-1998, when, by the way, we were still very, very profitable. My position was very secure within that company, and in fact, I could get away with just about anything that I wanted to get away with as an executive in that company because I was so successful. The fact of the matter is, when Turner decided that they were going to merge with Time Warner, all of a sudden, key executives at my level and way above my level started changing the way they did business. It went from being a very entrepreneurial-based culture within Turner, which is what it had always been up until that point, to a very bureaucratic type of culture. Everybody at my level and above was trying to become what they felt their peers at Time Warner were, and it became impossible to get anything done. When accountants started telling me how to write my show, I knew that we were in trouble. And what I did, quite honestly, and it was a mistake, it was a miscalculation on my part, but I tried to muscle my way through the quagmire. And, you know, I remember Harvey Schiller telling me at one point, president of TBS Sports, Eric, you're successful, but your shoulders aren't big and aren't broad enough to fight that fight. And he was right.
I got to talk to you about some guys who have big, broad shoulders who had some things to say about what it was like back then at WCW. We'll do that when we return with Eric Bischoff. This is fun.
Off the Record with Michael Landsberg is brought to you by the Keg Steakhouse and Bar. For great steaks, good friends, see you tonight.
It's not even competitive anymore. It used to be fun. Tuesdays used to be fun because we get the Nielsen ratings on Tuesday afternoons at 4 o'clock. We used to look forward to that because it was competitive. You felt like you were in a race. It's not even a race anymore. We're so far ahead of them.
Well, now, of course, it's no longer
God,
a race.
what a bad haircut.
I don't think you thought that back then.
No.
I think you were pretty sure it was looking fine.
Oh, man, I thought I looked great.
Yeah. Let's talk about what went wrong as we continue to talk with Eric Bischoff about WCW, about your time in the company, out of the company. I have heard from a lot of guys, and I was making reference to the broad shoulders of wrestlers, who said that one of the problems at WCW was a lack of discipline within the roster. Do you assume some of the responsibility for that? Is there anything you could have done to manage those egos better?
Sure. You know, I have to accept some of the responsibility. I was the guy at the top. A part of that is the culture. You know, it was that way when I came to WCW in 1991 as an announcer, and I was never able to change it. Part of the problem was the guaranteed contracts. I didn't invent guaranteed contracts.
And you're talking about Hulk Hogan specifically, right? What,
No,
I mean,
not at all.
I mean, but
not
he
at all.
was.
I didn't say anything about Hulk Hogan.
Right, but Hulk Hogan is a guy that was the best known of the guys that came over to your company with a contract that tied your hands in a lot of ways because he had creative control, didn't he?
Not really. Not at all.
He didn't have creative control?
He had creative control, but it never became an issue. It never became an issue. Hulk Hogan was the easiest person that I had to work with. There were times when it was difficult and challenging, and there were times when we saw things differently, and I had to manage those situations. But overall, he was one of the easier people for me to work with.
Bret Hart.
Bret Hart was very easy to work with. I like Bret personally. On a personal level, we get along very, very well. It was not difficult to work with Bret.
Bret says, and he said on the show, got a lot of respect for Eric Bischoff as a person. He didn't know what to do with me.
He's right. You know, to a large extent, he's right. But part of the reason is because of, you know, the situation. Bret, in my opinion, as much as respect as I have for Bret, didn't have the passion. I think because of what happened to him in Montreal, certainly what happened with Owen, I think Bret was in many ways a shell, professionally, of his former self. I don't think that I had the ability to figure out how to fix that.
But you had Vince's champion,
and I'm not sure
right?
anybody else did.
But you were in this incredibly wonderful position when you got Bret, right? Because here you had a guy who was Vince's champion, who had left in so much controversy, and a lot of people look at that as a missed opportunity for WCW, right there.
You know, who knows? You know, you can't go backwards. But like I said, when I brought Bret in, I brought him in for a very specific reason. It wasn't to continue the WW then F saga and bring Vince's champion over, and that wasn't in my plans from the very beginning, and I don't think it was in Bret's plans.
A lot of people
either.
talk about you and Steve Austin, and they say, well, you let him go, but weren't you one of the first guys to recognize his talent, that in a lot of ways, the Stone Cold Steve Austin that we see right now, who was probably the greatest money maker for a company in the history of wrestling, was a guy that you recognized his talent right from the beginning?
Well, Steve was a talent in WCW when I got there, and Steve, you know, despite, again, revisionist history that seems to, you know, be quite commonplace in this industry, you know, Steve always had talent from the very beginning, and the reason I let Steve go, from my point of view, despite what everybody else likes to say, had nothing to do with whether or not I considered that he was going to be a star or not.
Why was it?
Circumstances were such that Steve was injured a lot. He had a lot of nagging injuries. Quite honestly, I got the sense that Steve Austin was less than thrilled that so much emphasis was being placed on Hulk Hogan when Hogan came into WCW. Steve was less than easy to work with on a pretty regular basis. And I'll never forget, again, this is my perspective now. Steve may see it differently, and I'm sure does. But, you know, at one point we had Steve scheduled for a television interview on one of our shows in a venue called Center Stage in Atlanta. And we knew he was hurt, but we just needed an interview out of him. We didn't need him to perform in the ring. Steve didn't show. Could have been a breakdown in communication. That's quite possible. But when he was reached at home, or when we placed a call to his home, and his wife answered and said that he wasn't there, but whoever was making the phone call could hear Steve in the back saying, "Tell them sons of bitches I'm not here." You know, at that point, do I feel it's incumbent upon me to get on the phone and make a phone call and let somebody know that they're fired, or that I need to show up at their home and tell them in person? No. I did what I had to do legally, which was notify him by mail. That's what his contract required. That's what I did, and I moved on.
And as you look at Steve now in WWE, he's back. How much does your experience knowing him from back then affect what you think of the way he's acted in his departure from the WWE now?
You know, I don't know Steve Austin now. Steve Austin doesn't know Eric Bischoff now. You know, we're two entirely different people professionally. In terms of his personal life, I really don't know anything about his personal life. It's none of my business, nor is it any of my concern.
One of the things you loved back in WCW, I know, was being with the guys, right? I mean, you said on this show just a few moments ago you love wrestling. I'd like to talk to you about your love for wrestling and lots more when we return. Eric Bischoff, stay with us. We're talking about your love for wrestling. We're talking about your admiration for wrestlers and liking the guys. Eric Bischoff, you like wrestlers. I know you liked hanging out with guys. That was part of the joy of the job. Does that
That's not necessarily true.
No? Okay.
I'm curious how you know that, because that's not necessarily true, but continue.
Last time you were on the show, you said that you did the Wolfpack sign. I mean, you seem to enjoy the whole wrestling environment. Am I wrong?
Oh, I love the wrestling environment. You know, I'm not a social person. There's very few people that I socialize with, period. Wrestlers, non-wrestlers. If you're not my wife or one of my kids, you don't see much of me.
You didn't want to be one of the
socially.
guys back in the day? That wasn't part of the appeal?
No, I didn't want to be one of the guys. The fact of the matter is, we worked together. We were on the road together. You're surrounded by them most of the time. And if you're going to interact with anybody when you're working 15, 18 hours a day, it tends to be, you know, the wrestlers. There are a few wrestlers that are my friends, certainly. But not because they're wrestlers, because it happens to be because of the personalities of
Does
the
Vince have an advantage over anyone he competes with? Because it's not 9 to 5 for him. I mean, wrestling is his life. There really isn't a lot else that goes on with Vince in his life. And he's not buddies with the guys unless their last name is McMahon. Is he the guy who's perfectly suited for that role because of those dimensions or lack of dimensions to his life?
You know, I don't know. I really don't know Vince well enough to know if, in fact, what you just said is true. I do know that Vince...
You work for him now, though.
I work for him, but I'm not with him.
Are you having beers with him after the...
No, absolutely not. Absolutely
Is
not.
he having beers with anyone?
I don't know. He may.
You suspect not?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't think so. You know, Vince is very health conscious. Vince works probably 20 hours a day, and hanging out and drinking beers with people is not necessarily conducive to being able to maintain that kind of schedule. But I don't know what his social life is. I have no clue.
One of the things you did was, I think you changed the industry because you brought television as the main focus with Nitro, and that changed the industry forever, and in a lot of ways, I think made the WWE what it is today. When you look at their product, when you see how they do business, what can you say, you know what, I think I had a lot of influence in that. I think I started that.
I think my fingerprints are all over that company, whether I'm there or not there. I think the fact that Raw is live every week is due largely, if not completely, because of what I did with Nitro, as you pointed out. When you look at the cruiserweight division in SmackDown, you know, I challenge your viewers to, you know, get back to you. Let me know the first time they ever heard cruiserweight as it related to
5 years ago on this show, if I remember correctly, and I wasn't paying attention to all of what you said, but I think I remember you saying
kidding.
that...
I'm not sure you paid
the
attention to anybody other than yourself.
Hey, I'm challenging what you're saying, and I'm listening to what you're saying, because I think that 5 years ago you said cruiserweight, that the sport was going to get smaller. That was the future.
Right. You know, prior to that, wrestlers were referred to as light heavyweights or junior heavyweights. And this may not seem like a big thing to people, but I determined at the time that if we were going to bring in a lighter weight class, not to call them junior heavyweights or lightweights, because that belittled them. That made them feel like they weren't as significant in the big picture as the heavyweights. Cruiserweights has a different ring to it. It creates a different perception. And yeah, the cruiserweights are on Smack. They don't refer to them as light heavyweights or junior heavyweights. They refer to them as cruiserweights. So to that extent, my fingerprints are on that business.
With the Nitro girls, did you change, to some extent, sex in the industry?
I don't think so. Not any more than the Dallas Cowboys do. Not any more than, you know, the Los Angeles Lakers do, or anybody else.
But that's a different industry, though. I mean, that was the first time in wrestling that we had seen it done that way.
It was the first time in wrestling you'd seen it done that way, but we've seen it in other sports and other forms of entertainment, and you continue to see it. The Nitro girls, I don't think, were overtly sexual. I think they were window dressing. And yes, there was a sexuality to them, but it wasn't, I don't think, overtly sexual.
On that note, we go to break. As we go to break, we want to know your thoughts. As always, we want to know what guests you want to see, and we want to hear comments from you regarding the guests. This is for you, Eric. I know you got hammered a lot over WCW, but I actually liked it a hell of a lot. Good to see you back in the game. That from Stan in Toronto. And you know what? That is just a sampling of some of what we got. You got a lot of fans, and I want to know what you would do, WWE. We'll talk about that when we return.
Great.
He is Eric Bischoff. A lot of wrestling fans are thrilled by the fact that you're back in the wrestling ring doing what you have done so well for, I guess, more than a decade, and that is entertain the folks. Congratulations, and thanks for doing the show.
It's really been a pleasure. Thank you.
It's really been a what? Well, it's profitable for us because I know the ratings will be good, and I also know I got this. You want to make any bets right now?
No, I think I learned my lesson.
I think
I'm
you
not going to
did,
jump
yeah.
off that cliff.
And I
again.
bet you're a tough guy to teach a lesson to, so I'm pretty proud about that.
Well, you should be.
You were talking about WWE, and you said your fingerprints are all over that company. As you look at it now, if you were sitting in a different position at the top, what would you do with it?
I'm not sure that I would do anything differently other than perhaps maybe be more aggressive about the brand extension. You know, because of the lack of competition in the world of sports entertainment, I think it's even more necessary now to distinguish between the two television properties.
Does the product get hurt because of a lack of competition? Because I think the product was at its best when you and Vince were just kicking each other's ass.
I think it forces everybody to think differently. You know, the business endures. It's been around since the beginning of television time, and it's never going to go away. But it will change as situations change and the environment changes. When it was competition that was forcing that change, it happened very rapidly, and it was easier in some respects. Now it's a little bit more challenging, but I have no doubt that the business will endure.
Let me throw out a few names at you, and you just comes back with one-line answers, if that's okay. Chris Jericho.
An interesting performer.
I'll just let that seep in. Paul Heyman.
Paul Heyman, very intelligent.
Ric Flair.
Consummate professional.
Scott Hall.
Sad story.
Dennis Rodman.
A riot.
Michael Landsberg.
I'm beginning to like him a little more.
Well, let's play a clip. You had a comment a while back to our internet folks. You were talking about a comment that you made on this show 5 years ago, talking about Stone Cold Steve Austin being a big fish in a small pond. Listen to the comment.
The comment wasn't necessarily meant to be a criticism per se of Steve Austin. Now, a lot of people took it that way, and of course, idiots like Michael Landsberg decided to try to use that statement, and still is using that statement to try to generate some interest in his show. I'm so good.
So a guy, hold on. I listened to that for the first time because, as I said, I don't pay attention to much what you say. But you're saying he's using that to sell his show. Shouldn't you respect that? Isn't that what it's all about?
Well, like I said just a few months ago, I'm beginning to like you a little bit more as time goes on.
And I'm beginning to like you, if for no other reason, that you're going to be in WrestleMania first time, which is just around the corner now.
I can't wait. You know, it's the first time I've ever experienced anything at this level. And to be in that environment, to feel that energy, and it goes back to what we talked about earlier about being a performer. There's an electricity and an energy that's going to be in that venue that I have never experienced in my life. And it will probably go down as one of the highlights of my professional life and my personal life as well.
Eric, I got to tell you, this was a lot of fun. It's really good sparring and dueling with smart guys, and you're one of the smartest.
Thanks, man.
And don't forget, WrestleMania 19 in Seattle. Apparently, according to Eric Bischoff, it's going to be an amazing show. Great show today. Thanks for joining us on Off the Record.
Off the Record with Michael Landsberg is brought to you by the Keg Steakhouse and Bar. For great steaks, good friends, see you tonight. Michael Landsberg's wardrobe supplied by Grafton & Company. Get it at Grafton.